So, Brother Welker, what is a lesson that has stuck with you as you've grown older?
What stuck with me as I've grown older, probably one of the things that stuck with me the most is just the importance of families. When I grew up, we lived in Texas. My parents both grew up in Colorado. And I remember every summer we would make the drive up to Colorado and we would go visit my grandparents there, and then we would often get with other aunts and uncles and cousins, and we would go on a tour of the Western United States. My grandparents owned a motorhome at the time, so we would caravan with them in their motorhome across the country, and we'd stop and visit campgrounds and national parks and places like that, and just being with all these family members was really fun. And my grandparents had 50 grandchildren. We came from a large family, but we always felt like when we were with them, we were important to them. And I loved my grandparents. I loved spending time with them. Some of my best memories growing up are being with them. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the interview that I did with my dad, he mentioned even in that interview how important families are. And that's been driven home to me again this year because besides my father passing away this year, I also lost a cousin to COVID, and that was about my age, and he died about the same time that my father did. And his mother, my dad's oldest sister, she had gotten her COVID vaccines, and so she was the only one of the extended family that was able to come down to Texas and be with us during the funeral. And I think that was very, very important for her as well as me, because we were able to lean on each other for support during that time. And so just friends, I remember friends growing up that I had, but as we grow older, we've drifted apart. But family, you never drift apart from your family. My siblings and I now are scattered all across the country. I've got a sibling in every time zone and in almost every latitude across the country, but we're still very close. I still talk to all of them almost on a weekly basis, and we've all gone our different directions in life as far as careers and things like that. But my brothers are still my best friends to this day, and we were all able to be together and support each other when my father got sick, and then when he passed away, and without all of my siblings and my mother and us all being able to be gathered there together to draw strength from each other, I can only imagine how much more difficult, because it was still plenty difficult going through that experience, but I can only imagine how much more difficult it would have been without the support of family. So that's probably my biggest lesson in life, how important families are.
Yeah. So my next part here was has that been so meaningful to you? But I dare say you answered that.
Okay.
So I'm curious, how many siblings do you have then?
I am the oldest out of 6 kids. So there are 5 boys and 1 girl in my family. I have a brother. My next oldest brother is missing a leg. He lost a leg when he was 11 years old in a terrible accident. He lives near where my parents live in Texas. Then I've got my next oldest brother is a diesel mechanic in Colorado Springs, Colorado. My next brother is a colonel in the Army, and he's currently studying for his master's degree in business at the University of Georgia. Then my next, then actually I skipped over my sister there. She lives in Colorado Springs also, next to my other brother. She works in the shipping department at Johnson & Johnson, medical supplies. And then my 2 youngest, my second youngest sibling is the one studying for his master's degree, and then my youngest sibling is a manufacturing engineer at a glass bottle manufacturing plant in Missouri.
Wow.
So we're scattered all over the place, and we have a great diversity of careers among us.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I mean, you got colonel all the way down to shipping and all that.
Mm-hmm. And I had two of my siblings served in the Army. My brother is a diesel mechanic. He served in the Army as an enlisted man, and he was actually deployed to Bosnia during the Bosnia conflict in 1998. So he got his tour of duty overseas. My brother, who's a colonel in the Army now, he is, since he graduated from college, he did ROTC at BYU, and he has since been transferred with the Army. He's been to Alabama, Germany, back to Alabama, to Korea, to Louisiana, and now he's at the University of Georgia.
Wow.
So, and he's going to be graduating next year, and then we'll see where they send him next. That's a little bit about my family, but we have a lot of great memories growing up. Even when we were growing up, we were best friends with each other, and we did a lot together, and still to this day, my brothers are my best friends.
I don't know. Yeah, it sounds like family's also pretty well traveled, especially there with your brother and, well, brothers, I should say. And the armed forces there. Which,
in fact, I talked to my two youngest brothers. I talked to both of them today. So
yeah, which circles back to I wanted to circle back to the road trips your family took around the West. Do you have a specific favorite of all of those?
Yes, I probably do. When my grandparents retired, they moved from Fort Collins, Colorado up to Seattle, Washington area, and they bought a fishing boat. And they would spend their summers, they would tow that fishing boat up to the north end of Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and they would spend their summers up there fishing. And in 1988, I believe, I'm getting old now, I can't remember the exact year, but around that time, we made the drive all the way from Texas, drove clear across country up here to Seattle, and then we drove with them up to Canada, and we spent 2 weeks up there with them fishing on their boat. And that was an amazing experience for me as a young man. I was 14 years old at the time, and to get to go out on a boat on the ocean, and we caught tons of fish. We would spend the night on the boat. We would go out, fish all day, drop the anchor in a little cove at night, and we would sleep on the boat. There, they had accommodations for about 10 people on the boat. It was nice and tight and cozy, but there's a steering cabin up top and a fishing deck on the back, and my grandmother would be down below decks, and we would go down there and we would play games with her, and she always had treats for us, and my grandpa would let us sit on his lap or help him drive the boat, and we got a lot of fish, and we got to see killer whales, and we got to see Alaskan cruiser liners and barges and traveling across the ocean, and that was a memorable experience for me. I actually have a scar on my finger right there from cleaning fish on the boat. I cut my finger all the way to the bone there, and guess what? There's no emergency room to go get stitches in the middle of the ocean.
Well, I mean, at least it didn't walk away without a souvenir. I mean,
I have a permanent souvenir from that trip, so they wouldn't let me clean any more fish after that, so.
You're like, but I only halfway cut it off. Come on, let me try again.
Well, one of my memories from that trip is when we would get back into the harbor and bring the boat back to the dock after being fishing for a couple of days. Everybody else would be, really excited to go get off the boat and go back to the campground or go play or whatnot. But I stayed and helped my grandfather clean the boat. And I just remember that experience. Just he and I were there, and I stayed with him, and we cleaned the boat. And I think afterwards he took me out and bought me ice cream. But I just enjoyed that experience. Now fast forward a few years after I graduated high school and before I left on my mission, I had another opportunity to travel with my grandparents, just them and myself, clear across the country. My cousin was getting married in Idaho, and my grandparents were in Texas with us, and I helped them drive to Idaho for my cousin's wedding. So for a couple of weeks, it was just me and my grandparents in a car driving across the country, staying in hotel rooms, and then staying with the family in Idaho, and then driving back across the country to Texas, and that was a memorable experience. And then one more experience I remember when I lived for a time after I graduated high school, or after I graduated college. I lived in Castle Rock, Colorado. So, and my brother was living in Colorado Springs at the time. My grandparents were making a drive from Seattle, Washington, all the way to South Carolina to travel, because just like my family, their children were scattered clear across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And so they came through Colorado and they stopped and visited us, and they took me and my brother out to dinner that night. And then they went on their way. And when they got back to Georgia, my grandfather had been feeling ill, and he went to the doctor and found out that he had cancer. And just a couple of months later, he was gone.
Wow.
And so I will always remember the time, you know, they stopped and they had dinner with me and my brother on their last trip across the country. And who knew at the time that was going to be their last. Well, you know, like my father, you know, my grandfather was taken from us fairly suddenly and without much warning. But I will always, and I got to see him one more time before he passed away. I flew from Colorado to South Carolina, where he was at, and most of my siblings also made that trip. A lot of other cousins, aunts, and uncles made that trip, and we got to spend a weekend with my grandfather. And he was still well enough at that point to go out on short walks in the neighborhood, but it was only a couple of months later when he passed away.
So they were able to spend some time with him there then, yeah?
Yep, that was, you know, I call them, you know, to me, those are sacred experiences.
Oh,
So.
If you were to give one piece of advice of how people could like better value their families, what would it be?
there you go.
Wow, that's a good question. I would say just valuing your family, valuing those relationships, and doing things together. You know, your friends, as I mentioned, you know, I had friends when I was in high school, but I don't keep in touch with any of those friends anymore. You know, it's my family that I keep in touch with and that I care about. So, you know, do things together, help each other. You know, if you have a family member that's struggling or has challenges in life, you know, help them. You know, spend time with them. You know, I remember that experience of spending time with my grandparents driving across the country. I have a lot of special memories of when I was in high school of going to high school football and basketball games with my father. When I was in high school, I took my younger brother to a concert to go see his favorite band perform. And the night of that concert, I was really sick. I was not feeling well at all, but I still took him to the concert, and he had an enjoyable time. And the band that he wanted to see was the warm-up act at the concert. And so when they were done performing, I asked him if he wanted to stick around to see the main act, and he said, "No, I think I'm good." So we left at that point because I was really sick.
You're sitting there with your trash can.
But yeah, just, you know, spend time together, do things together. Two of my brother, who's a colonel in the Army now, he came and when he graduated high school, he came up to Provo and lived with me in my apartment there while I was a student. The last year I was a student at BYU, and we took a lot of trips to go hiking in southern Utah together, and those are some great memories. I've got a lot of pictures from those trips and some of those hikes that we went on, and those were good experiences, good memories for me. So that's what I would just spend time together, do things together, and, you know, just value that time.
Okay. One of the things I've caught a few times as you've been talking here is that you've lived in a fair few places.
I have lived in a few places.
Yeah, that's
Not intentionally, but
So I was wondering, rather than, you know, Colorado, Provo, Texas, and Walla, and college place, I guess. Yeah, I'll count that for you guys. You know, what other places have you lived, or sum it up?
So, I was born in Fort Collins, Colorado. That's where both of my parents grew up. They moved to Overton, Texas, 3 weeks after I was born. Now, they've spent the rest of their life in Russ County, Texas. So my father spent the entire rest of his life, and my mother will spend the rest of her life in Russ County, Texas. From Russ, so that's where I grew up. All the rest of my siblings were born there. I grew up there. I went to kindergarten through high school there. My siblings all went to kindergarten through high school there. We all graduated from the same high school. Some of the teachers there, saw all 6 of us go through their classrooms. So from there, I went on my mission to the Ogden, Utah mission, and I went back to Texas. I never really thought that I would ever leave Texas. I kind of had this vague idea that, Texas was my home, and that's where I was going to be. That was the culture that I grew up with. That's where I was going to be. I went to BYU. I spent 5 years at BYU, and when I graduated, I got my first job in Castle Rock, Colorado, just south of Denver. So I moved to Castle Rock. 2 years later, I got fired from that job, and wasn't sure what I was going to do at that point. I was still single, so I just had to find a job somewhere. I found a job in Las Vegas, Nevada. So I moved to Las Vegas. At the same time, through a set of miraculous circumstances, I started dating my wife, who was living in Dallas, Texas at the time. She and I grew up together. We hadn't really talked for several years at that point, but we reconnected, and we started doing the long distance dating thing. Then a year later, we got married, and she moved out and joined me in Las Vegas. All of my kids were born in Las Vegas. We lived there for 12 years, and then I got a job offer. I wasn't looking at the time, but an opportunity all of a sudden presented itself to me to move to Walla Walla, Washington. And so, intrigued by that opportunity, I ended up taking it, and here we are. So I've been here for 4 years now. But yeah, so Texas, Utah, Colorado, Las Vegas, Walla Walla, that's all the places that I've lived.
So what is it you do then, where you're saying your job brought you up here and everything?
I am a construction superintendent. So I got a degree in construction management at BYU. I got my first job in Colorado working in an office of a construction company. They're a very small construction company. When I got let go there, I got hired by a construction company in Las Vegas. They made me a project superintendent on my very first project, and I rose to the occasion, I guess, and I've been a construction superintendent ever since. So I have been doing that for almost 16 years now, and I have built a lot of buildings.
Oh yeah, well, 16 years.
Including 4 years in Walla Walla here now. I've built several places here in Walla Walla.
I believe it.
In fact, if you're driving back up to a College Place or Walla Walla, you'll drive on the main highway there past Walmart and past the Honda dealership there. Just right to the next to the Honda dealership, there's a mental health residential treatment center there.
Okay.
And that was the first project I built here. So I built that building.
Wow. Yeah. So then, what's probably a building that you're most proud of for building that?
Oh, good. I built a lot of buildings now, so I got to think for a minute. The company I worked for in Las Vegas built a lot of retail construction projects. I built a lot of grocery stores, I built some gas stations, grocery stores, a lot of things like that. But those are, if you've seen one grocery store, you've seen every grocery store, right?
More or less, yeah.
So I got an opportunity there to build a library for the city of Henderson, Nevada. And it became kind of their flagship library. It was a very unique project, but it was something that was very important to the community. They had a major groundbreaking ceremony there for the project. They brought out the mayor and all the other dignitaries, and it was a fun project, a unique building, but it was something that has a lot of impact for the community, I think. So I'm kind of proud of that project. And at the end of that project, the owner actually gave our company a plaque and an award for to show their appreciation to us for building that project. And that plaque, for almost the entire rest of the time I worked at that company in Las Vegas, that plaque sat on the counter behind the reception desk. So every time I walked into the office, I saw my plaque sitting there behind the receptionist, and that was just something for me to be proud of. And still to this day, if you go look on their website, and look under their project portfolio, you can find that project listed. So that was a good project.
Right. I think I kind of led to add that in now, and I don't know what else to say. So, do you have anything you'd like to question about?
Not that I can think of right now.
Alrighty, back to the list.
Back to the list.
Yeah. Okay. Here's one that I think is somewhat interesting. What important historical events do you remember?
So the biggest historical event I can think of that comes immediately to mind was the 9/11 terrorist attacks.
Of course.
And how old were you guys or were you even born when that happened?
No, I don't think I was born yet.
Okay. That kind of, I really have to stop and think about that now. It kind of amazes me when I realize that, your generation wasn't even born yet when that happened. I was in college. I was starting at BYU, or actually I was at BYU. I was actually in about my 4th year at BYU when that happened. And I remember getting up that morning, and I left my apartment, got in my truck, drove to the school. I usually parked at an off-campus parking spot, and I started out my day working as a student employee in at that time I was working in a mechanical and plumbing shop. And as I was driving to work that morning, I turned on the radio, listened to the news, and they were talking about these airplanes that had crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City. And so I got to work, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty big news. So I got to work, and the paint shop, which was right next door to the mechanical shop I was working in, they had a TV. And we all went into the paint shop, we gathered around the TV there, and we started watching the news. And just seeing those buildings on fire, and seeing what was going on there, and then hearing that the plane had crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. That was surreal. And I remember as we were watching that broadcast on live TV, I saw those buildings collapse in real time. And I just remember thinking to myself at that time, how many people did I just watch die? Right in front of my eyes. You knew that when those towers fell down that people were dying. And you may or may not know or may not remember, but those towers had actually been attacked 7 years earlier, and Al Qaeda had tried to blow them up then by using a truck bomb, and that caused a lot of damage, but it didn't, and it killed a few people, but it didn't bring them down. And so just because of that, I knew that about 40,000 people worked in those 2 buildings, and I just thought, there's potentially tens of thousands of people that just died right in front of my eyes. I will never forget that. And later that day, it was a Tuesday, and BYU has a campus-wide devotional every Tuesday at 11 o'clock. And I didn't usually go to the campus devotionals. I would often use that time to do homework or other things, but that day I went to the devotional. And it was the first devotional of the school year, and President Bateman, who was the president of BYU at the time, was going to be speaking that day, and he was going to be welcoming everybody to campus, for the school year. But normally there would be just a few thousand, students in the Marriott Center. But that day the Marriott Center was packed to the rafters. And I don't remember everything that President Bateman said now, but I do remember that he gave a message of hope and reassurance that things are going to be okay. And God, it was just a very emotional day. And I still every year now, when the anniversary of that rolls around, I reflect back to that time and what it was like to get that news. I will tell you, the world changed that day. The world has never been the same since then. There are things that we deal with in the world today that didn't happen before 9/11. For example, there's much greater surveillance. Surveillance and security are so much more important now than they were then. Before, we just took life for granted. As the country went about its business, it was unthinkable that America could be attacked on American soil. Barring Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, but that was a military attack on a military target. This was the first time in history that America had been attacked on American soil on a large scale like that, and it was very, very sobering. Airport security has never been the same since then. You know, before then, any passenger could go through, or you didn't have to be a ticketed passenger. Anybody could go through airport security. If you had a family member or a friend flying out of an airport, you could go with them through security and go wait with them at the gate. Since 9/11, only ticketed passengers are able to go through airport security, so that's something that changed then. All airplane traffic was grounded on that day, you know, and they had to get every airplane out of the sky as quickly as they possibly could, and so they just had airplanes coming down and landing wherever they could find a spot, you know, and the airports in this country aren't set up for every airplane out there to be on the ground at the same time, so there's not a gate for every airplane. So they just were parking them wherever they could park them and finding a way to get the passengers off. And yeah, that was pretty amazing experience. I'll always remember where I was at, what I was doing, and what it was like when the world changed on that day.
I can see you're pretty emotional about that, so I'm kind of curious, since that day, has the day affected you personally since then?
It affects my family personally for a different reason. I wasn't married at the time, I wasn't dating my wife at the time, but she and I grew up together, so I've known her all my life. Her brother passed away on that day. He was in a hospital with some other health complications in Texas, and he passed away on 9/11. And so it's a little bit of an emotional experience for my wife's family just for that reason. And I mean, it's just emotional to me because, you know, when you really stop and think about it, I mean, I watched thousands of people die on live TV.
Yeah.
And to see, you know, a tragedy of that magnitude, you know, carried out right in front of your eyes, I mean, just even after the planes hit that building, nobody still could have imagined, even at that point, that those towers were going to fall down.
I know you had multiple people saying bold to it as it happens with Trump, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, firefighters were going up into the buildings to try to rescue people and put out the fires, but nobody, even after the planes hit the building, nobody could have imagined what was going to happen next.
Yeah.
So that was just, I hope someday I'm not a fan of big cities. I don't really have a big love for going to big cities, but I hope that someday I get the opportunity to go to New York City and visit the 9/11 Memorial Plaza and the museum there. Because, I mean, for the United States of America now, that's sacred ground.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's like a national battlefield.
Yeah. I don't have anything else necessarily.
How do you think the world is gonna change from like the recent COVID-19 stuff that's been happening?
That's a good question. I think the world is going to change. I think that just like it changed on 9/11, I think that there will be some things that we see that will change, that will never be the same as they were before the pandemic. What those are ultimately will kind of still remain to be seen. We see there's a lot of challenges now with supply chains. Oftentimes you'll see empty shelves at the grocery store or a Walmart or at Lowe's or Home Depot, where before you just took it for granted that you could walk in there and buy whatever you needed. And I think that we may not see the supply chain return to normal, or if it does, it'll take many years. It's not going to happen overnight. And even in the construction industry that I work in, it's a big challenge now to get materials that we need to build our projects. And so I think that's a potential change. I think that there'll be changes in the way we manage our health, for example. Like, you know, now we wear masks everywhere we go right now. I don't think that we'll always be wearing masks every time we go out in public, but I think that we'll be a lot more aware of how diseases are spread, and we'll take more precautions, like, you know, washing our hands or more often, or, you know, hopefully people will be a little more inclined now to stay home from work or school when they get sick. So I don't know what changes are going to ultimately happen, but I think that there will definitely be things that are never the same after this.
Sure.
And someday you guys will be sitting there, talking to, the next generation that wasn't born yet and telling them what it was like to go through the pandemic.
Oh, yeah. Heck, I'm sure even we'll end up telling some who are alive right now, even like 5 or 6 year olds who are like,
Right, exactly. And, and for my family, I mean, it's, life's never gonna be the same again because we've lost five family members have died from this pandemic.
Looks like we need to be wrapping up here. I think that's what Clint just tried by us.
So, do you have anything else you'd want to talk about, or?
I'll just maybe share just a couple other thoughts. I think sometimes now, and I've talked to my own children now about, just other ways that the world has changed since we were growing up. For example, when 9/11 happened, smartphones didn't exist then, so, people, couldn't just pull out their phone and just start videoing everything like you can now. When I was a young man, we still had a wall-mounted telephone in our house, and, if you wanted to talk to somebody on the phone, you had to go, and it was a rotary dial phone, so you had to go sit there and you had to dial the numbers and let the thing, click around, click off the numbers and sit there or stand next to the wall to talk to someone on the phone. You had to memorize phone numbers, if you wanted to call your friends or, whoever, you memorize all the phone numbers, just, what you did. I still to this day remember the phone number for, my best friend growing up. So that's one thing that's changed. When I was also growing up, we lived out in the country and we only had 3 TV stations. And you had to go outside and turn the antenna, like physically grab the antenna and turn it to dial in whichever station you wanted to watch. So we only had 3 stations to choose from.
Living in the country now is somewhat more interesting with stuff like that.
So we didn't have video games, we didn't have computers, and we didn't have the internet. The internet didn't come along until, my parents didn't get the internet in their home until I was on my mission. They didn't have the internet when I left on my mission, and they had it when I came back. So to entertain ourselves, we went outside and played. You didn't stay in the house during the day. You went outside you came in for lunch, and you came in when your parents called you when it was dinner time or time to go to bed. But other than that, we spent all of our time outside, and we rode bikes, and we built forts, and we played in the woods, and we went for long bike rides. I could ride my bike for miles and miles and miles, and my parents didn't have any way to know where I was at or keep track of me. So. But, they didn't worry about it. We didn't worry about it. So, yeah, I think it amazes me how fast the world changes because, I've listened to my parents talk about what the world was like when they were growing up and my grandparents. And it's just every generation, the world is a totally different place now. It's just, when for thousands of years, things didn't change hardly at all for thousands of years. And now it's just constant change. Who knows what it's going to be like, in another 20 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure Connor and I here could even tell you some ways it's changed for us too.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, it amazes me how fast the world changes now. It's almost unfathomable.
Yeah, it's
I mean, I remember when we got our first video game system. We got the Nintendo, Super Nintendo. Actually, no, we got the regular Nintendo system, and then we got a Super Nintendo. And I'll just have to confess, I never was very good at video games. So after a while, when I realized that when I play video games, I just got frustrated and angry. I decided, you know what, I just quit playing. I don't play video games nowadays. I haven't for years now. So we don't allow video games in our house. So so the world the only constant in the world now is change.
Yeah. It's just not the constant we want.
Yep, and it may be good or it may be bad, but it's what we got. So
it is what it is.
Well, thanks for your time, and I guess we're done.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.